What the Heck's your source for Warhammer Underworlds in under 30 tough choices to craft that perfect deck. Today, I'm your host, Phil, and joining me, my ever-loyal servant of Nagash host, Zach. How you doing, Zach?
Hey, feeling good. I'm ready to impart some hidden knowledge on the community.
Oh, very nice. Nice little call out there.
Yeah.
For folks who are wondering, some context for this episode, we are recording this on November 22nd. We are also going to be soon recording another episode, so you might actually end up hearing these out of order. So this one's being recorded first, but we might actually have the other one come out first. So just very important to know that if anything happens between this episode being recorded and the potentially multiple weeks before it is released, it's not being mentioned because of that reason. In terms of topic for today, we wanted to, for deck building in second edition, we did an episode on this a long time ago, and it was back in first edition. So some of those things no longer really apply. So we are having to revisit and hopefully have a good conversation about it. But before we get on to that main topic, we have our normal community shout outs. Zach, is there anything you'd like to shout out for the community?
Yeah, a recent one, at least as of time of recording, Jake over at Goonhammer with the Starting Hex blog had a relevant one to this conversation, actually, just merits of taking high risk, high reward objectives.
Yeah, it's pretty cool little episode there, or our blog entry, I should say. It's a written format, not a podcast. But yeah, just trying to figure out what do you do with those really high glory cards that are sometimes hard to score, and how to manage whether you should include those in your deck. So timely and an interesting read. Along with that, we also have another recent one over on Battle Mallet's blog that did just an analysis of some of the top cards from each rival's deck from Worlds. So rather than looking at each player's performance, just taking all the different decks and all the different pairings and trying to sort of synthesize, like, what were the cards that everyone thought were best because they were being used most frequently across all the decks, and then giving a very cursory sort of reasoning for each of those cards. So sort of an interesting way to understand what were some of the powerful cards that everybody was thinking about when they were building for Worlds, and you could use that for when you build your decks. As well, some older articles that you can go and check out. Staggerers blog has their Nemesis deck repository, so if you're coming here because you're trying to figure out how you want to build decks, what you need to be considering, there's a whole list of decks already assembled that you can then look to either for inspiration or to just start from, like just take the deck as is and use that as your starting point and then tweak from there. And then some other stuff over on Spent Glory. They have a new player's guide. So if you're listening to this because you're new and you're not quite sure what to do yet, that is a helpful resource for a number of different aspects for the game, but deck building certainly and deck choice are part of that. And then the Contender series over on Spent Glory as well covers a number of topics. One that is, I think, particularly relevant here is the how many cards do I put in my deck, which I'm sure we are going to talk about a little bit more here. But if you want another take on it, you can go check it out over there. In terms of what the heck is going on with us, Zach, what have you been working on? I know you were not with us at Worlds, so it'll be interesting to hear your thoughts on Worlds and what you've been tinkering with in the meantime.
Yeah, for sure. I took a keen interest in watching Worlds. Since last episode I was on was the fantasy draft we did to apparently prove that I knew nothing about what was going to happen, coming in tied for last with that. But so putting together an article about that to just kind of go over what we did, what I might change if we were to do it again next year in terms of the fantasy aspect of it. But otherwise, just playing wise, just putting in a bunch of games with a bunch of different things. I broke Skinnerkin back out to give them a try the last league night, and collected a fair bit of haunch off of some zombies and ghosts.
Yeah, that's a quite the feat with ghosts, being that they don't have any flesh. But it's a cool warband. There was one at Worlds, and they did pretty well. So it'll be interesting to see if people are willing to give them more of a try. I think, looking at them on paper, similar to last edition, is always like, the stats maybe aren't the best, and got some weird restrictions you have to work around, but they seemingly play better than they look on paper. So
yeah, you can get that haunch roll and you're going to have a pretty good time.
Yeah, I mean, lots of healing potential. Grievous sort of on demand rerolls if that's what you need, although their accuracy is, I think, actually already pretty good. So not to get too far off topic, but as a fellow enjoyer of the Skinnerkin, did you ever find yourself needing or wanting to use the spend a haunch, get inspired?
I don't think you're going to use that very often. If it was before the action, I think there'd maybe be an argument for it, but it being after an action just for the fighter that just went, kind of not useful, especially when you're inspiring the whole warband at 3 anyway.
Yeah, 3 is not that much. Like, you're potentially able to even pick that up in one attack. Like, if you get a kill and you have flanked and it's from a butcher, like, you just did it. So I was just curious, because I know that's sort of been one of the discussion points. It's like, why would you ever do this? And it sounds like still haven't really found a good reason for it, but
yeah, probably not ever.
Anyway, that is less of a important topic for today, but something that I know we both have enjoyed that warband. So
absolutely.
On to the actual topic though, and relevancy here for this episode, deck building. So this is going to be sort of a broad take. We will have some deeper dive stuff, but to start with, I think we just want to reestablish some rules of thumb. We've certainly talked about these things in the past of like, when you go to start building a deck, what are just like the really, really basic things that you can always keep in mind, of just like, without having to think about all the other factors, because there's a lot of factors in this game that you have to consider. What are some of the things that it's like, if I don't want to think about too many other things and I just need to get a deck put together, where do we sort of start from as like the basics? So I think one that always is, I think, hard to decide on, or at least for newer players, sometimes hard to decide on, is like, how many objectives do I take? How many power cards do I take? So I'll give you the floor here first, Zach. How many objectives do you think should be in your deck in total, and some reasons for why that might be?
Not to hit you with it depends, but it depends. If you're playing, usually the more aggro decks in this edition have some less good multi-glory end phase objectives. So I find myself, especially with like Blazing Salt, taking an extra objective just to bump up the ceiling a little bit. If you're playing more of a hold strategy or a flex strategy, sometimes I'll still run that 13th one to bump it up a little bit more depending on consistency, but usually those are going to lean more towards the minimum 12.
Right. So to keep it simple at first, it sounds like you're usually looking to do your 12, 6 surges, 6 end phase.
Exactly.
And then there's obviously considerations to go above, but it sounds like really never more than 13, right?
Not typically. I know some people have had some luck taking more than that. The absolute maximum you can score in a game is 15, so I would never recommend going over that.
Yep.
But even that 14th one's usually a tough ask.
Yeah, I think we saw Grimwatch that were running a full 15 at one point, which was wild. And apparently it worked, but I don't know how. And I think actually at Worlds we might have seen some folks who were running 14 for that higher glory ceiling. But again, I think just as a simple rule of thumb, without having to like dive into like, what does my warband do well? What is the deck's pairings? Then you need, because like these are all things you have to think about, and we'll talk about that some more. But to give you a basic rule of thumb, just as a place to start, for consistency's sake, I think you want to aim for 12 and then maybe 13 if either you feel like you need more glory or you just feel like you can't decide and you just want to play it out. Just 12 or 13. I think that's the place to start.
Yep, start with 12, do some testing. If you find you can get through your whole deck and are still wanting more glory, then you can go for that 13th later, but I would start with 12.
It's actually a really good point of like, start here, play it. If you're like getting to the end of the game and you're like, oh, I've already scored everything, or like I drew my last objective before the end phase of round 2, it's a sign that you could probably run more objectives in your deck. Similar to the number of objectives that you would want to take, and I think this is somewhat decided for you, but we can discuss. Is there a total glory number that you feel like you really want to be aiming for?
Depends on what you're playing, right? If you're playing Strike, you're usually going to get more glory in bounty. So you can sit a little lower, sort of towards that like 15, 16 range. Otherwise, I'd usually try to look for about 17 or 18 index that aren't going to be going for a full table or near full table.
Yeah. And I think that was sort of the answer I was expecting, but just to confirm my preconceived notions, the way that Rivals decks are now structured, because they all have a 16 glory total, no matter what, like every single Rivals deck always does, except Cataclysm's kind of weird because they have the one variable objective. But
it's got 16. You're scoring that for 2.
Yeah, it's counted as 16. Especially now you're scoring it for 2 with the Aquagranus. But I think because of that, you kind of already know that, like, if you're combining 2 decks, you ought to still be able to hit 16 or close to it, with the exceptions being like certain things like Blazing Assault has Annihilation. So 5 of that glory is tied up in one card that you probably aren't taking most of the time. So you may end up lower, but like you're probably in a range, right, of like 15 to 18 most of the time. And so if you're in that range, you're probably fine. If you're below or way above, you probably have some questions that you need to be answering about, like what's going on with your deck? Why is it so low or so high? So I think that's a good rule of thumb to just say, be close to 16. Like, take 12 cards, be close to 16 glory, and you're probably doing okay. Yep. For ploys and upgrades, I think it gets a little tougher. And I think we can just start by saying the total number of power cards that you take is in some ways limited, in the sense that you can't have more ploys than upgrades. So it means that at minimum, since you have to take 10 ploys, right? Like your deck has to be 20 cards minimum.
You could take 20 upgrades if you wanted.
I guess. Okay. So I guess you could actually take fewer ploys and still pad in upgrades and have 20 total cards. I don't think that we even really need to discuss that for the purposes of this episode. That's not a good idea. Probably don't do it. So basically, rule of thumb for how many ploys to run, 10 is probably the right number for the rule of thumb. Just don't have to think about it too much, because you are limited by that. Like, you must have an equal number or more of upgrades to your ploys. Any reason that you can think of where maybe that wouldn't be the rule of thumb, to just say stick to 10?
I would say 95% of the time you want to stick to 10.
Yeah.
Maximum in your like drawing cards, you're going to see 15, right? 5 per round for 3 rounds.
Yep.
If you lose every single roll off, that's still only 3 more cards. That's 18. You still haven't seen all 20. There's still some room in there for some focus fodder, right? So you can take a focus and still get some value out of it. The only exceptions will be if your warband has ways to draw cards. I'm thinking like Yolthari or Headsman, you might bump up to 11, but generally stick to 10. Yeah.
I think the rule of thumb can very easily be 10. As we said, number of different factors for card drawing math, basically, that just determines how many can you take and still feel good about it. And we'll talk some more about some other reasons why you might go above. But for the most part, if you're just like, I just need to build a deck, I need to know how to build this power deck, just stick to 10. That can be a lot easier said than done. There's a lot of good ploys, but I think that is the safe bet for your rule of thumb. In terms of types of effects, so this is maybe starting to get outside of rule of thumb range, but I think it's still important to talk about from just like a rule of thumb standpoint of like, what are the kinds of things that you think should always be in a power deck?
Things
and specifically from the ploy side.
Yeah. Things that are going to be useful from the start of the game. So, or like just in the first round. So things like pushes, extra accuracy, more damage if you've got it, some guard tech. Those are kind of the ones I want to make sure are in there. And then you can start getting into like, do I want some pings, some more control pieces that are going to help me deny, but maybe not score my cards as well.
Yeah. I think the way I was kind of conceptualizing is the same way. I was like, you want universally useful abilities. So you like things that let you just push fighters, whether those have caveats or not. It's probably always going to be useful. So probably as a safe rule of thumb, just say like, make sure you have some pushes, whether it's just a sidestep or you have multiple effects. Like having some in your deck is probably better than not. And I think almost every deck has access to some kind of push, so probably worth always having one. Extra accuracy I think is harder to come by in ploys, but they have printed quite a few, but some of them have some weird caveats. So like I think I would say if it's available, probably take it. Extra accuracy on demand is always good.
Yep.
It's just the question of like, is it something you can actually use when you want to? Like I'm specifically thinking there's a card in Deadly Synergy. I can't remember the name because I think it's a bad card to include most of the time, but it's like, give a not unified fighter plus one dice in a round. It's like, so you have a card that does the opposite of what everything else in the deck wants you to do.
Right. Yeah, it's
very
like
weird.
Just in case I'm in a bad spot or something's happened.
Which is like not how you want your deck designed. So in general, I would say if you have accuracy available, probably take it, but keep in mind weird caveats as to when you can play the card, because they may mean like maybe don't. I think guard tech, that call out is actually a really good one. Like if you have access to being able to go on guard, probably just take it. Guard has always been really strong, but I think even more so this edition, right?
Yep.
Like it both gives you survivability and denial potential. Because like once a fighter's on guard, unless you can just kill them, there's almost no way to get them off a spot.
Yep. Very few ways to get them off of there if they're on guard.
Yeah. So I think safe rule of thumb, take some accuracy, take some pushes, take guard tech. If you have access to those things, they're always going to be useful. Beyond that, I think everything else sort of starts to become more situational. So we can discuss down below when we have some more detailed considerations. Finally, for some rules of thumb upgrades, I think given that we said that the rule of thumb for ploys is 10, should upgrades then also just be 10 as a rule of thumb?
Yeah, I would typically not take more than I would take ploys, so 10 is a good rule of thumb.
Yeah. And just to explain the math, I mean, we were already saying you're not going to see all 20 cards in most games. And so if you were to take more than 10 upgrades, you are further diluting your chances of seeing all your power cards, and that you'll see fewer of your ploys because there's fewer of them proportionally. So I think definitely worth saying, if we're saying rule of thumb 10 ploys, then rule of thumb should be 10 upgrades as well.
Yep.
Or equal number, I guess, right? Because if you've decided to go above for ploys, then you keep it the same number for upgrades. I have a note here that I didn't really explain, so I will just jump into what I think I mean by this. And so as a rule of thumb for like what types of upgrades to look for, start with eating your veggies. Do the healthy thing for you, which is like take your basic boring stat cards.
Yep.
Plus attack dice, plus damage, plus movement,
plus health.
Plus health. Yeah, like they're boring, but they just work. They're just good. They're never gonna. Yeah, there's never gonna be a time where you're upset that you have those cards. So, always start with those, and then figure out what the like neat tricks that you want to fill in. Any other thoughts on that as a rule of thumb?
No, I think you hit it. Take anything that has the word great in the title. I would probably at least consider that card. And any other like stat boosts. I kind of need a reason to not take it rather than a reason to take it.
Yeah. Yeah. And then Keen Eye is the great version of accuracy.
Great accuracy.
So,
if
yeah, that you can just replace that one with, those two words if you'd prefer to think about it that way. Great accuracy. All right. So I think that sort of rounds out our rules of thumb. That's obviously just trying to start with the super basic stuff for like, hey, I don't understand deck building that well. How do I just know if I'm sort of on the right track? So just to recap, keep your objectives to 12 if possible, probably 12 to 13 as like the only real range, unless just as a rule of thumb, just keep it 12, 13. Yep. Total glory, be around 16. Ploys, keep it to 10. Take those pushes, accuracy and guard. And then in terms of upgrades, do the simple things first. Keep it to the same number of ploys. If you do all of those things, you're probably pretty well on your way to having a functional deck, regardless of what else you're doing.
Yeah, your deck shouldn't be too bad at that point.
Yeah. Where you go from here, this is sort of where we start getting into some of the weirdness, difficult things to consider. All the sort of choices, I guess, come in from that point. Because doing all those things, you're actually still having a lot of decisions you have to make and having a lot of different card options. So I guess where do you think people should start thinking about detailed considerations, Zach?
I would start with what your war scroll does.
Sure.
So if you have anything, and I like to think of it as, if you have anything on your war scroll that's something that no one else does or very few other warbands do, look to see if you have any cards that can take advantage of that. So playing Wellner, who's playing a lot of Exile Dead recently, he's got a lot of ability to take the cards that say have a vulnerable fighter do a thing, or have a vulnerable fighter in a certain spot that most warbands won't even take a look at.
Yeah, most of those are in Rack and Ruin. So probably a good bet that you might see that with Exile Dead. Sepulchral Guard used to use Rack and Ruin for the same reason, but their Revive doesn't have their fighter vulnerable anymore. So, I definitely agree that that's sort of like the only way you can make the choice for how to build your deck. You really do have to understand your War Scroll abilities and your fighter stats. Mm-hmm. What are the things that I'm already good at and I want to do that more, or the things that I'm bad at and I need to shore up? Mm-hmm. Which we've seen actually just recently. We at Worlds, everyone was a bit surprised by Kurnoth's Hunters being just present at all.
Right.
And part of the deck pairing that was built for them was specifically to cover their weaknesses, which their biggest weakness is their defense. Mm-hmm. They have 5 health, but 2 fighters that are only on 1 dodge, it's like that 5 health is not going to last very long.
Right. Yeah.
So taking Emberstone Sentinels and I believe it was Countdown to Cataclysm and doing like the full defensive, full hold plan with really aggressive fighters, because it gave the most tools for protecting their stats. So that's the kind of thing you want to think about. I think the other way that I like to think about that stuff is that like all of the once per game abilities on a war scroll really are just cards that you get to always have until you've used them, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So think about everything on your war scroll as a extra ploy. And when you think about it from that perspective, I think it starts to like fill gaps in your deck in a way where it's like, well, I've already got a push and I've already got, a way to have Grievous on my war scroll. So do I need to double down on those effects or do I actually need other things? Mm-hmm. And the answer to that question is actually kind of hard because it's like, do I need to double down or do I need more? Well, or to shore up something else. And it's like, well, that sort of depends on your stats and what it is those things that you can do are. So to take an example, I guess that's maybe simple. Wormspat, right? They have Grievous built into their war scroll. So would you even want Twist the Knife, which gives Grievous, it's the exact same ability, right? You get Grievous for the next attack. Mm-hmm. I think in that specific example, the answer would probably still be yes.
I think it's still yes, yeah.
And I think the reason is because you're looking at your warband and you're saying, what is it that I'm trying to do with this warband? And that warband wants to be aggressive. They want to get kills. So you can really never have enough damage, right?
Yep.
And I guess in the understanding of like, what is your war scroll doing? How is it that you take what my war scroll does, what my fighters do, and then decide? So like we just said, Wormspat, aggro. How do you get from looking at stats in the warband to I now know what the play style for this warband is?
I think you take a look at after your war scroll what the decks that might be good with that is. So Wormspat, an example, they've got 3 fighters. Reckless Fury wants you to charge all your fighters. They can do that pretty easily.
Yep.
Blazing Assault wants you to make a bunch of attacks and kill things. They've got good stats, a lot of damage. They want to kill things. So then you kind of go, well, those 2 things are things I want to do. So start building that deck.
Yeah. And I think it starts to narrow the field, right? So like you would probably look at Wormspat and say, okay, I'm pretty defensive. I've got a push. Like, does that mean that I can actually does that mean that I can hold? And it's like, well, but you only have 3 bodies. So like, what happens if you lose one of those fighters? Your hold strategy is starting to fall apart almost immediately. So can you really be a hold warband? I think in their case, maybe actually is still the answer because their push is for multiple fighters and they have a lot of damage reduction. So they're not likely to lose more than 1 fighter. But it seems like you're still kind of working against what they want to do. Something we haven't really talked about yet for War Scrolls and trying to understand what they're doing, the Inspire, I think, is actually pretty important in how you decide a play strategy. So again, for the Wormspat example, theirs specifically says 3 or more enemy fighters have damage on them, or you killed a fighter who had a bile token on them. Those are 2 pretty aggressive statements, right?
Yep.
And I think that's the other thing that would sort of like tip me towards saying, they're not a hold warband. They're an aggressive warband.
Yeah. Yep. Your Inspire can kind of give you a guiding light as to what you want to be doing throughout the game.
Right.
So take another example like Starbloods. They say you hold 3 tokens. Okay, well, you probably are going to be wanting to hold tokens throughout the game, so you should be looking to build a deck that wants to hold tokens.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you probably would never want to be like all in on aggro for a warband that says inspire when you hold 3 tokens, because how are you going to get inspired if you're just charging all day? Which is, I think, to say inspires are important. And so if you're not working towards your inspiration, like there's very few warbands where you don't actively work towards your inspiration. And those few warbands, it's usually because like the way you inspire is pretty passive. For example, Elethanes, which we just saw do particularly well at Worlds, they literally have no control over their
They
Inspire.
just inspire.
It just happens in the second round. So
Yeah.
there's no reason to have to factor in an inspiration then for them. And that gives them a little more flexibility, actually. So not to like muddy the waters, but I think the point is, along with evaluating the abilities on the War Scroll and the stats of the fighters, you are also needing to take into account, like, what is my inspiration asking me to do? And is doing that thing going to lean me in one play style or another? I think another good example of like War Scroll guiding deck choice is for warbands like Borgets or the Blood of the Bull, where part of getting them inspired and like doing their whole thing requires a very specific game mechanic. And in their case is delving. For Borgets, you just get inspired when you delve. It's just very simple. That is almost like as simple as it gets. And then on the other hand, for the Blood of the Bull, a little more subtle in that they get their Demon Forge dice when they delve a treasure token, but they can't do it if they're staggered already. So like normally you'd say, hey, War Scroll says do delving, therefore take pillage, but maybe not for Blood of the Bull, just because they don't probably want to always be delving. It's
They
very
certainly
specific.
don't want to. They don't want to end the round with those tokens in the cover hex side.
Yeah, right. So it's like, well, maybe they actually care more about holding treasure tokens, or maybe they just use them as like, I will land on them for a minute and then I'm fine to just leave them and then like come back to it later or something. So I think it's just to say there's a lot to consider, but it's really going to be like the make or break choice of like, well, how do I know what decks to build? Well, you kind of have to understand the warband first. I don't know, anything else that you usually consider when you're looking at a warband before you start trying to decide on deck pairings and playstyles?
Not too much. I think we covered most of it there. Just what can I do, or what am I looking to do with the warband? Is there something that nobody else can do that I can take advantage of? And then just what do my stats say I can realistically do here?
Yeah. So like normally if you have a full warband, just to sort of elucidate on a few of those points, I think what you're sort of getting at is like the new gets War Scroll and fighter cards. Some of the stuff says, hey, they could still hold, right? But they're all on one dodge and they don't get better when they inspire. Kind of makes you think that maybe holding is actually not going to be super doable because those fighters will just get deleted if they just stand in one spot that's always predictable. So I think that's sort of knowing like what can my stats do. In terms of like warbands that do things that other warbands can't, I think a great example is Mollog. Just getting to have surrounded for any fighter adjacent to a squig opens up a lot of play patterns that you can't do elsewhere, because like Deadly Synergy, for instance, is like there's a lot of stuff that says do a thing well united or the fighter was flanked or surrounded.
Yeah.
Well, just put them next to a squig and they're flanked and surrounded. It's pretty nice little pairing there that you can't really do with anybody else. So just as some examples of what we're talking about. So I guess now that we're into having a way to decide what your playstyle is and now being able to look at the different decks, I suppose it would probably be prudent to just quickly just talk through like which decks are good for what playstyles and why. And we don't need to go super in depth into each one, but I think just to run through them all, just to give a quick summary would probably be helpful if folks are not familiar with all the decks yet. So how about just pick one from the core box and we'll start from there.
We'll do one I've already mentioned here, Blazing Assault. Kind of your quintessential strike deck, as they've called it, or aggro.
Mhm.
Just it's all about how many things can you hit, how many things can you kill.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Just also like neat in that a lot of the scoring from that deck is about like, oh, how, I rolled a certain dice
mm-hmm.
characteristic or I made a certain number of attacks, but it actually doesn't care about whether the attacks were successful in all cases. So it's just like, are you attacking? Great. We love it. And that's kind of where it ends. And that's actually kind of good because it gives you a lot of flexibility. If it was like 3 kill surges, that would feel horrible, right? Because getting kills is not always something you can guarantee. Taking another one from the core box, we have Emberstone Sentinels, which is sort of the complete polar opposite of Blazing Assault. And this is very much the I want to be holding treasure and I want to be doing it as much as I possibly can. I think it's fair to point out both of these decks have really good and really generic power decks.
Mm-hmm.
And so in some cases, you actually see people just take these decks because they want the power cards. And they can kind of use that flexibility to fill out whatever else they took. I almost get the sense that was probably intentional. They built
kind of feels that way.
2 on-release decks that were very much like keyed into one play style, but also very flexible in their power decks. So like if you needed to fill out one half of your play style, grab one or the other.
Yep.
There's 2 left from the core box. Where would you like to go next?
I think I'll grab Countdown to Cataclysm.
Sure.
So I think this is actually kind of a flex-ish deck where you kind of want to be hitting some things, you kind of want to be standing on some tokens. So it's got a little bit of both in there. There's some of the easiest end phase glory you've ever scored, just for
Literally
showing up.
The easiest. There's never been a card easier to score.
Right. You got some end phase that say you hit things or you damage things, and some that say you're standing on tokens. So it goes a little bit in both directions. And then just some kind of fun control-y type cards, some pings, some just things that give your opponent bad decisions on the other end too.
Yeah, it's a bit of a filler deck. You can kind of use it anywhere. But I think it does a lot of good things. It's just not like any one thing that it does spectacularly well. So I really like it as a deck. I think it's ended up being better suited to the edition than I maybe expected at first. There was a time where I thought maybe it was too good. I think I was not fully understanding the edition yet when I had those thoughts, but it's certainly some good cards in there, some fun stuff to be able to do, but a more complicated deck to decide when to use it.
Yeah.
A not so difficult deck to decide when to use is Pillage and Plunder. We have found over now this year of second edition that this deck is just one of the best. For the reason of the objectives, I think, in particular, being particularly good. Giving your opponent a lot of bad choices, some stuff that's really hard to interact with. So like in a lot of cases, you can be like, well, I know you're trying to score supremacy, so I'm going to hit you off tokens. Or I know you want to, be attacking all my fighters, so I'm going to try and stay away from you as much as possible. Well, you can't really do either thing with Pillage because there isn't a moment in which you can disrupt a fighter before they can delve. And once they've delved, it's like, well, it's already happened. I now cannot undo the delve. So there's a few cards that are like specifically looking for whether or not treasures are on the board, and those are disruptive. But otherwise, Pillage is just good deck. I think almost any warband can run it. I think certain ones do it much better than others, but
For sure.
If you are like, I just need another deck and I'm not sure what else to do, you probably can't go too wrong by just using Pillage.
Yep.
Just know that
Pillage.
I think as a newer player, there's a lot of mental like tracking that comes along with doing delves, and how many things did I delve? Did I delve this token number type? Did I delve a token that my opponent had been holding from the beginning of the round? Did I, there's just things that are a little bit gnarly if you like aren't doing a good job of tracking it all. And I think that can be a bit of a downside, but that's the core box. The next deck that was released, I believe, was Blazing or Reckless Fury.
Reckless and Rack came out at the same time, yeah.
Yeah, how about you run us through one of those?
Reckless Fury was our second strike or aggro deck. This one was kind of focused on charge tokens, having fighters in specific spots with charge tokens, messing around with who has charge tokens. It proved at the start to be a little too powerful, and we'll get into some of the Forsaken and Restricted cards later, but just know that this was the deck that has the only Forsaken cards at the moment, and it's still 3 of them. Turns out being able to charge multiple times with pretty much any fighter and force your opponent to have to charge is pretty good.
Yes. Yeah. The deck ended up being very strong for aggro. It's particularly bad in that we had some really strong aggro warbands to start the edition. I still think it's a good deck. It obviously just won Worlds again.
Works just fine.
Again, I should say, like that word being very important in that sentence. But I think it's actually in a pretty okay place. You're not always going to reach for it. It's really just like if you're aggro, you probably like it, but only if you have a small enough model count.
Yep.
The other one, Rack and Ruin, this is sort of the weirdo deck. It's like when they say that there's a playstyle called Mastery, it's not a thing. Mastery is not itself a playstyle, but this deck epitomizes Mastery.
Yeah, kind of control, right? Kind of the control playstyle from other
that's sort of, I think, what the deck is aiming for is to be a control deck, but it's kind of all over the place. I feel like you've got like bonus accuracy, you've got pings, you've got these cards that give your opponents choices that they have to make, but then you get to do a bad thing to them regardless of what they choose. And then there's like a bunch of positional scoring, which is sort of like, well, you'd think you'd want pushes for that, but you don't really have pushes for your own fighters. So sort of a weird deck. I think it has a lot of cool tools, but it's a little bit of a hard one to figure out. Probably one of the hardest decks to use well, but I think, would you say it's fair that it's fairly rewarding if you can figure it out?
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. I think when we talked about all of us with our favorite decks, this has been one that's really jumped up for all of us. That it's a lot of fun to figure out, to crack the code on it, right?
Yeah. It's definitely like a player's deck, right? It's like, ooh, I can do all these cool little things, and then I get to do, these different effects, or I get to score this because I was able to sort of outplay somebody or outposition them, which maybe feels better than like, I rolled 4 crits. Both effective strategies, but one of them was not anything that the player did. Then we had Edge of the Knife. Edge of the Knife, I guess I'd say it's an aggro deck. It's got some weird stuff. It cares about fighters who are tempered, which means they either have 2 health or they've taken 2 or more damage. And then a lot of stuff that sort of works around that, but like a lot of it is still kind of in that aggro slant, I would say. So we've seen it used with elites where you're specifically trying to take some damage to get tempered. We've seen it with hordes where they get to take advantage of their small fighters. And it's kind of an oddball deck. I think a lot of people have really tried to make it work, and I don't think they've quite succeeded, but it has been decent.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we had at our Q3 tournament, our only undefeated player was using Edge of the Knife with an elite warband.
Yeah. So, yep. It does quite well in that pairing. It is not exactly what anyone expected out the gate, but being able to reliably take more than one hit means getting tempered is actually not that hard.
And when you've got some scary dinosaurs that will hit you if you don't hit them first,
Yeah,
it's nice.
yeah, for sure. What? Let's see. Was it Realmstone that came next?
Yeah, can we just skip this one? No, but this one's all about raiding cards, which you do via making successful melee attacks. When you raid cards, if they have a certain tag, it's Emberstone Ploy or Emberstone Upgrade, you can play them off the top of your deck instead of having to draw them later. So the idea here was kind of to scry your cards. It's turned out to be a lot of bookkeeping, so we don't see a ton of it, at least locally. But there's good stuff in here, and seeing more cards is always good.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the tough part is like you don't know what you're going to see when, and like you could potentially cycle stuff that you wanted to the bottom of the deck. This one is another aggressive deck, despite the extra stuff that you're having to keep track of. Like
make melee attacks.
It is really just asking you hit stuff with melee. So that is, in the nutshell, the deck. If you're looking for another aggro pairing, that's one to look at, but just know it is tough to play. Not a bad deck, but just really weird. Then we had Raging Slayers.
Yep.
Another very aggro deck. This one, I guess, is actually kind of in the same vein as Reckless Fury, but way less powerful. Mm-hmm. The big draw to this one, though, is the plot card that specifically says when you charge a fighter, you can choose to make them enraged. An enraged fighter can always reroll one of the dice in their attack rolls, which is pretty crazy, actually. But just know that like the objective deck is pretty bad.
Yeah. I would say if you're taking this, you're taking it for the plot card and then one of the upgrades, Haymaker, which basically says +2 damage to your less damaging attacks.
Yep. Yeah, maxes out at 4 still, so you're never going to like something crazy. Like you can't get a Mollog with 5 damage on an attack or something, but yeah, it is just like the super duper aggro deck, I guess. Most recently, we saw it with the new Gits paired with Pillage, so that you had good scoring from Pillage, but then the rerolls and aggro from Raging Slayers. Certainly a deck to keep an eye on. I sort of wrote it off when I first reviewed it, and since have seen that it can actually be quite effective, but you don't take a lot of cards from it. So something to keep in mind when trying to deck build with it.
Yeah, it has to be with something like Pillage, where you can take pretty much all of the objectives from Pillage, plus 1 or 2 from Raging, and then just make use of that reroll on the attacks.
Yeah, for sure. And then we got the 2 new ones in the new box, right?
Yep, those are our last 2. We have Hunting Grounds, which is listed as a strike deck, but it's strike in your own territory, right? So if your enemy, if you can make your enemy come to you, this works very well because then you can just hit them. You don't even need to kill for most of these cards, which is kind of cool. So it pairs nicely with things that let you stay home, such as like Emberstone or Pillage.
Yep. And then the other one is Deadly Synergy, which we talked about a little bit before, but this one is all about wanting to have fighters standing next to each other. And that gives them a status called United. United gives any fighter adjacent to a United fighter is flanked. So whether or not the fighter is actually next to 2 friendlies, you still can get that accuracy boost. It also helps as a defensive boost, which is nice. It's a little bit tricky, though, in that you do have to be thinking a lot about your positioning. So it's just something to keep in mind. That not specifically designed to be an aggro deck, but is often used that way so far from what we've seen. It's not necessarily what the deck is asking you to do, but it just kind of works well as another aggro option.
Yep, a lot of the objectives in there say a fighter or a United fighter made an attack, right? So immediately you're going to be like, oh, I'll just play aggro with it. Yeah.
And the extra accuracy really does go a long way for those aggro warbands to have that one extra facing on the die be successful.
Yep.
So that's a quick rundown of all the decks. Obviously not going into detail, but hopefully that just gives everyone a sense of like what's out there, which things are good for what. You probably noticed there's a lot more options for aggro than anything else, which is a little unfortunate, but
Yeah.
just the way it is right now. Hopefully our next deck will not be aggro and we can get a few more options into the mix.
I feel like we've been saying that for a while.
Oh yeah. I was hopeful that Hunting Grounds would be that thing, but
It's kind of halfway there.
Yeah, not to like harp on Hunting Grounds, but like it's just asking a lot to say that like you can really only score anything from that deck if your opponent comes to you, and sometimes your opponent just doesn't need to come to you. Like if your opponent is running Emberstone Cataclysm and is perfectly content to just stand on 2 tokens in their own territory, why would they ever walk into yours? So tricky there. I would love to see people play it more just because I'm sure someone will figure something out that works well for it. But as of right now, haven't seen a lot of it. Haven't seen it do a ton of work. But I think there's still something there. All right. So with all of that in mind, I think we can start to talk a little bit more about like specific types of cards and the things that you're looking for with those cards. Now that we sort of know how we've decided on our play styles, and with those play styles, what types of decks we'd be reaching for. So I think an area that I find interesting is like you're looking at surges and trying to like build your package of surge cards, which I think is sometimes the most important part of your objective deck. What are the types of cards you're usually looking for and why?
So the first thing I want to look for is surges that fit into my game plan. If I know I want to be making attacks, I'm going to be looking for surges that say make attacks, hopefully not attacks that need to be successful, because you can't game plan for that. So just things that fit into the game plan, right? If you're playing Pillage and you know you want to be delving tokens anyway, taking surges that give you glory during the round for delving tokens, usually a good idea. If you want to hold surges that say hold a treasure token with a fighter, usually going to be something you want to be taking.
Yeah, for sure. And I think within that spectrum, then there's like a number of different things that are like, this is asking me to do the thing that I want, but then you have to consider like positional aspects of it. I think this is often a tough part of surges this edition, is that there's a lot of surges that have positional requirements tacked on. Sometimes it's like, hey, you have to make an attack. Okay, cool. Oh, but you have to do it in enemy territory. And it's like, ooh, okay. So like still doable, still probably something I'm interested in, but you have to ask yourself, am I always the aggressor? Am I always going to want to be in enemy territory, or am I actually wanting my opponent to come to me? Because that sort of determines, can I use that surge effectively?
Yeah. So do I want to do the thing, and then do I want to do the thing where the surge is telling me I have to do it?
Yeah. How much value do you place on surges that are like, or how much do you consider whether the surges can be counterplayed or not?
You certainly think about it, right? If you would rather take a card that really can't be counterplayed than a card that can. But if the surge that can be counterplayed, if the enemy's counterplaying you anyway, are you scoring your end phases? So like if the counterplay is they knock me off the token and I'm not scoring end phases anyway, I probably still take the card, just because if I'm getting counterplayed, I'm not winning.
Right.
I don't know if that got to it.
I think it sort of gets to the where I was thinking about it, and also wanting to hear your thoughts on it, where it's like certain surges have timing windows, right? Or they all have timing windows. They have to, right? They're surges. Some of those timing windows are more manageable than others. So sometimes it will be after a action, and it's like, okay, great. that's just anybody does anything, this window is now active. That means I can do it just on my turn,
Preferred.
and there's never an opportunity for my opponent to really stop it. Great. Probably the best timing window to see is just at any point after any action, I can just do this thing. I guess maybe even better than that is like after a type of thing. And so what I mean by that is an action, you have to do the whole sequence, right?
Mm-hmm.
Some of these things are looking for you to be like after a move. Well, a move is part of a charge. So like you could even score the surge before you make the attack roll of the charge.
Yeah.
So like sometimes that's an even easier window. Sort of depends.
Yeah, I would say those are kind of equal, right? After an action and after some kind of subset of action.
Yeah, it's close usually. The only time you probably would care is if somehow you were able to do the thing out of sequence. So like if you could do it in the power step, right?
Mm-hmm.
If it says after an activation you made a successful attack, like, well, then I can't score it from a power card, let me attack. But if it just says after you make a successful attack, then it doesn't care if it was during an activation. So it's those types of things you have to think about for like, do I have ways of making the surge easier because either I have something on my war scroll that lets me do the thing at a time that I normally couldn't, or like, do I get more bites at the apple because of a thing my war scroll is letting me do or my power card's letting me do? Mm-hmm. So something to think about there. The other then sort of next flavor, I guess, of surges is like, do this after a power step. If it's specifically anybody's power step, then it's like, yeah, it's pretty flexible. I can probably play power cards to set myself up into this. There's very few of these, but that's still a decent window to have because you can set it up in the power step. And then finally, we have the after an opponent's activation, which usually means you had to like put yourself in the position to score it before your opponent gets to do anything. And these are the most counterable surges, potentially the best designed, just because it's like in a game, should we really have a scoring that your opponent can't do anything about? But it does somewhat lower the value. So I think that's something to consider when you're looking at your surges. Do we have any surges this edition that score for more than one glory?
Not yet.
Not yet.
I'm not sure if they've said we won't have any or we just haven't had one yet.
Feels like maybe a conscious choice now that we have 10 decks.
Yeah, I mean we didn't have too many before. There would be some
few and far between, but like they were almost always like, ooh, well, if it's for 2 for a surge, I maybe really need to think about it because
I'm looking
even
at
if it's a little harder. So I mean, I guess not a factor to consider right now. But if they ever print a surge that scores for multiple glory again, probably worth considering. I don't know. Anything else that you think about when you're looking at your surges?
Just how many of them do I feel good about? So if I feel good about 5 of them, that's probably a pretty good spot to be in. And then you can take a 6th one that you're like, I'll get this a good amount of the time.
Yeah, I might have to work a little harder, but like I can still do it. It's still within my game plan.
Yeah. But if my pairings got, I'm only sitting at 3 or 4, and there aren't too many pairings like that these days that only have 3 or 4 good surges. But those are usually pairings I will try and stay away from because I know my hand's going to get bogged down and I'm going to have a tough time getting to my end phase, much as less scoring those.
Absolutely. To your point about getting bogged down, I think there's also like a thing to consider of certain surges require certain numbers of fighters to be alive. And by that, I mean, if it's like a hold surge, you maybe need at least 2 fighters to be able to satisfy the conditions. If it's like, hey, you were holding, a token in multiple territories, or you're holding tokens with 2 fighters.
Right. Or even like share the load, which says a fighter moves and another of your fighters
was already on a token. Yeah. And that's just a feature token, which is also pretty gnarly. It's from Pillage. It's good. It's from Pillage. Shocking. But yeah, so like that's, I think another consideration is like body count matters, and certain surges work with certain numbers of bodies. And if you don't have enough bodies, they may become impossible. Mm-hmm. So just keeping in mind that, like, while this might be very doable from the beginning of the game, you have to consider the whole length of the game, because you could draw that surge in round 3 and you might then have to figure out what you're doing. If it's completely impossible by then, maybe you shouldn't have included in the deck. It's not a guaranteed thing that, like, no, you can't run it, but just something to think about. Mm-hmm. I think it also goes the other way. There's certain surges that are like, I think mostly this would just be like with kill surges, where it's like, oh, you did a certain number of attacks in this way, or like you made a certain number of attacks against certain types of fighters, or in certain scenarios. And it's like, if there's only one enemy fighter left, that's maybe just not even possible.
Harder.
Yeah. And well, often if you're playing aggro and there's only one enemy fighter left, that's maybe a good sign that, like, things are just going well for you. So maybe it doesn't matter that you can't score your surge. But I think it's something you have to think about.
I have definitely killed the entire enemy warband too fast.
Yeah. Unfortunately, there are scenarios in this edition where, like, if you kill the entire enemy warband, but you didn't get to score any of your surges along the way, you maybe locked yourself out of too little glory. Mm-hmm. And then you could still lose, even though you tabled your opponent, which can feel really bad. So there's some timing considerations, I think, for your surges that you just, like, make sure they're all fairly scoreable at any point in the game, regardless of board state. And if there are limitations, just make sure you have ways to manage those. Trying to think if there's other types of surges. So there's some surges, just to call out, because it's another, like, consideration for surges, but I think most everyone pretty much understands this to be like, it just makes a surge bad. But there's surges that specifically say, like, you did a certain number of things with a leader, but only the leader. Mm-hmm. It's like, that's an immediate giant limiter on the card.
Yep.
Because if you lose your leader, you just can't do it. If your leader is just not in position to do it, it's not going to happen, even though it's technically possible. So, like, when you can, probably avoid leader-specific surges, or maybe just leader-specific objectives entirely.
Yeah, in general, I would agree with that. Certain warbands that kind of rely on their leader to win anyway, thinking Mallet, thinking Kanan, that those maybe have a little more viability to those cards, but in general, I would still ignore those.
Yeah. If you're having to do, 60+% of the entire warband's work through one fighter, and it happens to be the leader, it's probably just going to happen anyway. So maybe it's fine, but, like, could still end up in a situation where Mallet goes down and now you just have squigs and you've bricked that card immediately. Mm-hmm. So if you have the choice, probably don't take those, because more flexibility in your surges is always better.
Yep.
I personally can't think of anything else to suggest about surges. For end phases, I think a lot of the same conditions apply, but the timing part is sort of always locked in as being like it only ever happens in the end phase. So something to consider there. Anything else you like to think about when you're looking at your end phases?
The big thing is there's some that score for more than one glory. So you got to kind of balance how much glory the objective gives you versus how hard it is to score it.
Yeah, for sure.
So a card that scores for more glory, but maybe slightly less often, you still kind of want to go for, as long as it's not too hard to score.
Yeah. And I think we can kind of draw some, like, pretty easy examples of, like, the extremes here, right? So, like, Annihilation gives the most glory for any end phase, but is also probably the hardest end phase. Yeah. Well, that actually may not be true. There's, I think, a few that are actually harder, but they're all just very poorly designed. But, like, how often do you actually table opponents in this edition? It's not that often, I
Well,
don't
I
think.
can tell you. I actually keep track of everything. So
Oh, you
let's
do?
see. I think, and specifically with Blazing, that's the one that it would matter for, since that's the only deck that has it.
Yep.
I think my table rate for Blazing it's 37%.
That's higher than I would have expected.
That's a lot of headsmen doing that.
Yeah, right,
Um,
right.
so I would say probably a little lower than that, but at
Just in
most a
general.
third, right? So that
Yeah.
card's not real likely to score. And typically, if you've tabled your opponent, you're going to win regardless of that 5 glory.
Yeah.
So I would not recommend that card in general.
Yeah, we did talk through an example of where you may actually be putting yourself into a bad spot because you tabled your opponent too quickly, but by and large, if you've killed every enemy fighter, you've probably won the game.
Yeah, I can count on one hand, especially this edition, the number of times I've tabled my opponent and lost. I think it's probably less than 2 or 3, or about 2 or 3.
Yeah, so not really something you have to worry about. And so Annihilation is sort of the extreme example of like huge payout, but probably just not really all that important. You'd much rather have something in the middle. I'm specifically thinking from like Reckless Fury has a card. Man, I can never remember the name of this one, but it is for having 4 bounty worth of friendly fighters in enemy territory with charge tokens. 4 or more, I guess I should say. It's worth 2, but it's like that's a much better ask, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it's still not guaranteed.
Control.
Sorry?
You have a lot more control over that than you do killing everybody.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. So it's worth less, but it's still quite a bit better of a card because it's much more reliable. Still fits your aggro game plan. I think sort of the complete opposite of Annihilation, though, would be something like Fields of Blood, right? Where it's just like, oh, there's 4 fighters who are damaged or out of action. Yeah, okay. Like that's just going to happen in every game.
That includes your own fighters too, right? So
yeah.
even if you're not hitting, if your enemy's hitting, you can still get this.
Yeah. I've pretty much never seen a game where that doesn't score. Like something would have to have gone just so wildly wrong for an aggro deck to just not be able to do that. So
I think the only time would be if you have it round 1, it doesn't happen then, and then you toss it so that it's not in your hand still. But
yeah. You probably would mulligan if you have that in your opener, just because like, it's pretty much impossible in round 1 unless things went perfectly. But it's only worth 1. So like you can have these really reliable end phases, but they're only worth 1. I think in general, you actually want both kinds of end phases, right? Like you want ones that are worth multiple glory and are a little harder because you want to raise that ceiling, but you do still want the reliability. So you sort of come up with that mix and figure out like where can I land with a high total that's not too greedy. Which, to go back to our rule of thumb discussion of like be near 16, I think when you're optimizing decks, you're trying to push above 16 as much as you can without jeopardizing your deck's reliability.
Yep. Yeah. Well, so you have to take a couple multi-glory in phases in order to get up to 16. Right. If all of your objectives are worth 1, that's only 12. So you need to come up with 3 or 4 at least glory in phases that isn't, or that's over the 1.
Yeah. So every card that's worth 3 is making that much easier. Just because it's like total amount of glory per card slot, right? And I think this comes back to our discussion of like, when would you go to 13 or 14 objectives? And it's for this exact reason, where you feel like you have access to a lot of reliable end phases, but they're not worth very much.
All worth 1. Yep.
And you would just say, well, odds are I'm going to score everything, so let me just pack a little bit more in, because unless you just don't see your end phase cards because you had bad draw, but if you're drawing into all your surges and you're not scoring them, that begs a few other questions. You should then be able to get through the whole objective deck, and most likely you should be able to actually score more than 12 cards in a game. 15, I think, is actually pretty unrealistic, even though
Everything
it's
went perfect. Yeah.
mathematically possible. So if we do 13, it's actually, I think, pretty reliable this edition. In terms of reach objectives, and by that I mean objectives where you know they're potentially hard, but worth decent amount of glory, where do you land on those? Do you take them as like your 13th to boost the glory with the intent that maybe you'll actually end up discarding it on purpose? Or do you see those cards as things to leave at home because they are difficult?
Those cards I usually end up taking. They're usually a sort of deterrent or determining how my opponent plays too, right? If I'm playing Pillage and my opponent knows that if they aren't standing on a token that I'm getting 3 glory, it dictates more how they play.
Yep.
So even if it's not a card that I'm going to score a ton of the time, I probably still include it just to make them think about it.
Yeah, and I think your point of saying that the specific type of sort of a reach objective there would be one where high payout, difficult to score, but it's difficult to score because your opponent has to do something about it.
Mm-hmm.
And that doing something about it is a cost for your opponent, regardless of the fact that they're denying you glory. So I like that. I also take pretty much the same approach. I try to include those reach objectives where I can. I think Unrelenting Massacre is the sort of next best example, where it's like, ooh, I can't afford to get charged out because I know my opponent is running Unrelenting Massacre, and therefore I must find a way to not give them that just like for free. Which then is, it's a cap on your activations, right? You're being told you can't charge with all your fighters, or risk giving up 3 glory. So, sort of a different type of goal, or I guess, right, for those end phases, and we actually see that a bit in Rack, which we talked about, of like these positional scores. But really, most of the time, it's not asking as much for you, but it is asking more for your opponent, because to take the example, Alone in the Dark, it's 2 glory, no fighters on the board can be adjacent to each other. You as the Rack player are just always going to be playing with that in mind. The question is your opponent, and can your opponent do that? Like, is that something they realistically can play around, and how much of a tax does that put on them? You probably are taking that objective for the total glory that it adds regardless, but I like how you can include certain things in your objective deck to put pressure on your opponent as well.
Yep. And then the other end of the big glory cards is ones that you do with your fighters, right? So Supremacy is the big one there, where it's a card that you're working towards, not necessarily one that your opponent's working against.
Yeah. Being that it's a big bomb like that is really nice, and it does make your opponent have to be like proactive about protecting those tokens. The redesign on Supremacy this edition, though, makes that pretty nice, where it's 3 total bounty with at least 2 fighters holding. So you don't have to hold 3, although oftentimes you would, just as a sort of a security measure. In case somebody gets knocked off, it's like, well, you drove one of my fighters off, I still have 2. And that's still going to be enough to score this. So some very nice stuff. There's a few other examples we could talk through, but I think you get the idea, right? It's like, take some of those higher scoring things. Don't go super crazy, though. Try to keep it as consistent as possible. The end phase is where the meat of your total scoring comes from, but is also only scoreable at 3 points in the game. So you really have to make sure that the timing lines up well.
Yep.
Anything else on objectives before we move into power cards?
Not too much. Yeah, just kind of balance your expected value of the objective with the consistency, right? So if something that you're going to score a good amount of the time, but is only worth 1, maybe you bump up to something that scores a little less, but is worth worth more when you do. So just kind of find that balance.
For sure. So with the power cards, we already talked about the total numbers. We talked about the generic types of things you like to have in plays and upgrades. We don't really need to talk through those again, except to just say, pushes are good. can't drive that home quite enough. But so like, okay, we discussed those things. It's like, yep, I get it. I should be trying to push. I should be trying to have extra accuracy. Is there ever a point where you would actually say you have too much of either of those things?
For those, I don't think there's too much, right?
Yeah.
If you want accuracy, like more accuracy is better, right? Make the number big.
Yeah. Weight of dice often works out in your favor, although as we saw at Worlds and in some anecdotal evidence of our own, 5 dice seems to be cursed. If you roll 5 dice, you're probably going to miss, but that is not proven by math. That's just personal experience. And I think you're right. I mean, for one thing, there's just not that many pushes in the game, and I think that's intentional. They know there's powerful effect. So as many as you can have is probably good, because repositioning in the power step is something that can often mess up your opponent.
Yeah, and I always figure if I have a push in hand at the end of the game that I didn't need to use, it probably was in a good spot.
Yeah, for sure. Or it maybe says that like, hey, I held this because I was waiting for like the perfect opportunity to use it when I could have had a good opportunity to use it, and I just didn't. And maybe my game could have gone even better for me, but I was like holding it just in case. Doesn't mean that it was the wrong thing to have in hand or the wrong thing to have in your deck. It's like maybe just some play considerations. So then we know that those things are good to have. We know taking as many of them as possible is usually the right choice. So where does that leave us for the rest? So, we're probably not filling out our entire deck with boosted accuracy, boosted damage, pushes. What is the other stuff that you are starting to reach for, and what are the considerations for wanting them?
There'd be things that are really good occasionally, or things that are always going to have some kind of value. Those are kind of the two things I would look for to fill out the rest of my deck. Yeah.
So let's give them an example. What is a card that you like that is sort of fits that category?
Something like Reckless Fairy Catch Weapon. This is a card that's going to help me score glory a decent amount of the time, but occasionally is going to be fantastic for shutting down maybe a big fighter that's trying to activate multiple times.
Yeah. So just for folks who are not as familiar with all the card names, Catch Weapon, this is one where after an opponent's attack...
After any fighter, but usually an opponent.
Oh, yeah. And does it need to be a successful attack?
Yep. After a fighter's successful attack, give that fighter a charge token.
Yeah. So if you need to put another charge token on one of your fighters, I guess technically you could do that. But most often, to Zach's point, you'll use it when someone attacks you and then throw a charge token on them. It's another one of those where it's like it's putting extra pressure on your opponent for things like Unrelenting Massacre, where they're already having to think about, like, can I afford to not charge certain fighters? And then being able to just be like, oh, you made an attack? Well, here you go. Take your charge token. It's neat. It only works in those niche scenarios, but when it does, it's quite good.
And then the other end of that... Oh, go for it.
No, go ahead.
I'll say the other end of that is something like Healing, where I know this is probably always going to be helpful, but isn't necessarily a big splashy play at any one point.
Yeah, Healing's an interesting one, right? Because it's effectively a ploy version of extra health, but you have to actually get hurt first. So if you're running around with a warband of 2 health fighters, there's really no point in bringing heals, right? Because like most every attack can kill your fighter regardless. The difference of having 1 health or 2 health is negligible.
Yeah.
But if you have a bunch of 5 health fighters, heals are really great.
Yeah.
So yeah, another warband consideration probably goes along with our upgrades, where we talked about bringing extra health is always a strong choice. There's very few heal ploys. Healing Potion being available in the Blazing Assault and Emberstone Sentinels, being very good there. Again, talking through the incredible power card selection from those two very generic decks. And then we have there's one in Pillage and Plunder for making an attack in enemy territory. And then there's one in Raging Slayers, but you have to be able to remove an enraged counter, I believe. But I think it heals for 2, so that one is like particularly juicy.
It heals 2 different fighters, right? That are
enraged.
Yeah, I think that's the one.
But still, healing multiple people, that's pretty good. And then there's the dynamic duo in Deadly Synergy, which you can put one fighter on guard who's united, and another fighter who's united gets to heal. The caveat there is that the 2 fighters, unless you're the underdog, do have to be adjacent. So some setup required, but still very good effects. Heals are, I think, a good thing to reach for.
Guard as well.
Yeah, and as we had already talked about, guard is a good effect to have. I think another type of power card that you like to have in your Surge deck, similar to guard, is there's a number of different cards that talk specifically about not being able to be driven back. Doesn't stop you from, or it doesn't give any sort of defensive boost like guard does, but it can still say, I'm on this token now, you can't move me off of it unless you can kill me off of it. Or if you have a push an enemy fighter card, which there are very few of those. So I like those. There's a handful of other like tricky things. Are there any of those sort of like quote unquote tricky effects that you like to use?
Not too many. The only thing I'll call out is plus speed. If you're a slow warband, if you're on move 3, those can be helpful as well. Tricky cards really depend on what you're going to do and how much room you have left.
Yeah. I think some of the early examples that we got printed were like, I can teleport this fighter, but they have to land in, a stagger hex. Which was Tunneling Terror, I believe is the name of the card.
And edge hex, hidden paths, same.
Yeah, hidden
same
paths.
Idea.
I have to start in an edge hex to do the teleport, but it's like, hey, you can end up on any other edge hex. That's pretty great, but there's some work to set it up. Teleports are like super pushes. If you think about it as like, hey, I get to reposition, but it's more than one hex. Just think about it as like, well, however many hexes you went, it's that many pushes. Very strong usually, but not always easy to play. Sometimes the timing or the restrictions of how you can play them makes them difficult to fit in. The pretty much only example of this that doesn't really have a limitation is Illusory Fighter from Blazing Assault, which you can just pick up any friendly fighter and put them on a starting hex in friendly territory, which is wildly good.
Maybe somebody should restrict that.
Well, they did, shockingly enough. We will talk a little bit about what you have to do when you're choosing your restricted cards. But so that's sort of like a few different examples of tricky cards. There's things like giving fighters stagger tokens, but I would actually consider those to just be extra accuracy.
Those are more limited accuracy.
Yeah. Because if they're already staggered, they don't do anything. If you already have another reroll, it's still an extra reroll. So like it's good for that reason. There's also other reasons to stagger fighters. Certain warbands like can't do certain things if they're staggered. Certain
Blood
cards, Blood of the Bull especially, they really don't like cards that give out stagger tokens. I don't think we have any scoring that cares about stagger tokens this edition, but like it used to exist, so I wouldn't be shocked if they printed it again. So something to keep in mind. They're not as useful as they used to be, but still has some value. And then I think the other flavor of sort of tricky stuff that I like a lot is being able to give out move tokens. There's very few of these. There's one in Hunting Grounds. There's one in Deadly Sinner. No,
Edge, I
edge
think,
of the
has one.
knife. Yeah, edge of the knife. Fighter near your leader. There's probably another one that I'm forgetting about, but the main point being that like a fighter with a move token can't charge. If you can't charge with all your fighters, you can't get charged out. It's especially problematic for warbands that have very few fighters. So just being able to say, I've now denied you a certain situation. I think it's especially strong when you are playing against Reckless Fury.
Yes.
Be able to be like, oh, that fighter hasn't charged yet. You can have a move token. And then they're like, oh, boo. And hopefully they don't have head case or something. But
yeah, or Raging Slayers, same idea, denying the powerful parts of that.
No charge means no enraged counter, which means no reroll, which is sort of the whole reason you brought the deck. So some control / counterplay type cards, pretty rare cards because they're pretty powerful, but like quite useful. And I guess there's one last category of like can't be attacked or like damage gets capped. There's only 2 that I'm aware of that exist for this. So one is in Rack, which is fireproof, where your fighter just in the next activation, nobody can take more than 1 damage. And then I don't remember what it's called in Hunting Grounds, but it's like a certain fighter in enemy territory just can't be the target of attacks. So you could
that Paths Unknown.
Paths Unknown, yeah.
Yep.
So you make a pretty useful charge or something, but it's risky to for the positioning, and then you're just like, no, you can't attack that fighter back. And if you can do that in the last activation of the round, that can be especially powerful because it can guarantee their position. So some neat stuff. Before we talk a little bit more about upgrades, I guess it's worth discussing how do you value card draw this edition, and do you think you really ever want to bring card draw cards?
I think card draw is pretty good. As we mentioned, you're not going to see or there will be parts of your deck you won't see by the end of the game, unless you have some way to draw cards. More cards for more options is, I think, pretty much always better.
Yeah. And for folks who are like, well, I get to draw more cards, so I should put more cards in my deck. Not usually always going to be the right choice, because as we discussed, in most games, I guess you'd probably say roll-offs are pretty much 50-50. So you'd say
2 max.
On average, 1.5 roll-offs will go against you. So you'd get 1.5 extra cards, but there's no way to say 1.5 cards. So 1 to 2. Expect to draw an additional 1 to 2 cards a game, which means you're seeing 16 of your 20. So if you had a card that lets you draw 3, you're still not actually seeing everything. Even in that scenario. And that's like your normal use case. So don't probably add more cards unless you have more than 1 draw effect.
Yep, but that draw effect can let you see all of your cards, right, if you're sitting at 20. So it's still very good to include those, especially if it's things you can control, like by the numbers.
Yeah. All right. So some upgrade decisions then. I think the one that I always think a little bit about when I start grabbing cards is, how do you balance in second edition the effect of your power cards for upgrades versus their cost in total bounty needed to play them?
In general, I would say the bounty cost is only a big factor in the first round.
Right, yeah.
So if you've got cards that have a lower bounty requirement, and so like 0, we have some 0 cost ones, those are ones you want to see more often in the first round. But as far as including them, I would try only to do a couple, maybe 4 max, that cost more than one bounty, and make sure those ones really have an effect that you want to be waiting on.
Yeah. So a good example would be Great Strength costs you 2 to play it out, but getting Grievous on any fighter's melee attack is really good.
Mm-hmm.
You'll never not be happy that you have it. So
I would say if you're fine waiting for it to be active in round 2, then it's probably worth 2 bounty or 2 glory.
yeah, yep. On the flip side, some cards that maybe aren't worth their cost. There's the card in Rack and Ruin called Barge, which this is a card that I know Skylar really likes. I actually think it's interesting, but it's essentially a card that lets you charge and then push a fighter after the charge, guaranteed, but you don't get to make an attack, right? Mm-hmm. So that's the trade-off. But you only get to unlock getting to do that action with a 2 glory upgrade. And you really got to ask yourself, like, okay, this 2 glory upgrade in my deck, is it worth the same as Great Strength or Great Fortitude? Because that's what it's costing me for a pretty niche effect, right?
It can be very powerful, but I would generally agree, like this, it needs to be something you think you can take advantage of in, I don't know, 3 out of 4 games or so.
Yeah. And I think it, because it's essentially a charge that doesn't get to make an attack, you're giving up that whole activation of that fighter for the round, because ostensibly the charged fighter is not going to activate again most of the time, just so that they can push a fighter. And like, that's a lot to ask just to push a fighter. Sometimes it's what you want because you know the most important thing is to like get that fighter off a token.
So if they're on guard or something where they can't be driven back by an attack, you can still kind of shove them off with this.
Yeah, it's pretty good, but there's a lot to consider as to whether or not that'll work out for you. Like, you'd have to wait to do it until they can't activate that fighter again. Mm-hmm. Because if they're not charged and you use this, they'll just be like, okay, next activation, I walk back on. Like, what did you accomplish then? If they have a push in hand, then you're really out of luck, because it's like, I spent an activation to do this. They got to spend 1 power card. An activation is worth way more than a power card. So I think it highlights 2 sort of extremes of the multi-glory upgrades as to like ones you would always want to see versus ones that are very situational, and having to make that choice as to when to include them. Mm-hmm. Are there any other types of upgrades that you like to reach for that are different, or like the non-standard, like just boost your stats stuff that you think is always kind of good to reach for?
I like to throw ones in that maybe give my opponent a bad choice on their turn. So something I'm thinking particular here, Driven by Pain out of Countdown to Cataclysm.
Yep.
Where like this doesn't necessarily do anything, but if I can put a bad decision out there, it starts to really gain its value.
Yeah. So just to highlight a scenario that would be bad, right, is like, I'm holding this token in no one's territory. It's the only token in no one's territory. That suggests that to my opponent that I am going to be scoring something for having held that, because Countdown has Shocking Assault. It was a surge for holding after an opponent's after a power step. No, opponent's activation, for holding all the tokens in no one's territory. There's usually 1. So it's like, okay, well, I need to get that fighter off that token. But if you drive me off, I get to heal. What's that worth to you? Mm-hmm. And I think this kind of comes back to our earlier discussion about like understanding your warband stats and what helps you, because say you're Thorns of the Briar Queen, right? You are probably playing some sort of a hold game plan, at least partially. You're probably kind of flex, really, but you could be taking Countdown. But if you are, would you really take Driven by Pain? Because most of your fighters have 2 health. Does the threat of healing even factor in on a 2 health fighter?
Not really.
I don't think so. So it's good at just anecdotal evidence of like what we were talking about before, of like how you have to factor these things in. It's a good effect, but not for everyone. So that's the thing to think about when you're like, does this card make sense for my warband? a good example of a weird upgrade that doesn't make sense for all warbands is there's I should look it up because I will feel silly if I don't remember the name of it. It's in Rack and Ruin. It's an upgrade that is going to let you make the result of one of your card or one of your attack
Henchman.
dice.
Yep.
Yeah, henchman. Good on you for remembering that one. Really weird card. Like you get to have a single result just be a flanked result, which really only helps you if you know you're going to have the ability to have flanked situations show up for your deck. So like certain warbands, like not that Mollog would usually use Rack, but if they were using Rack, this is pretty much guaranteed to work for any of his fighters. The downside, of course, is that it also says the fighter with this upgrade can't re-roll attack rolls. So like if a lot of your warband relies on re-rolls, you don't take this card either. So very niche, but can be useful. I personally have used it with Hexbanes because I have these dogs that I can just sort of guarantee that I'll have flanked, which then means I have an upgrade that says no matter what happens with your dice roll, you can have one success, which is really good. So that's kind of the weird category of extra upgrades that you could have. I think similar to some of the things that you had discussed earlier of ploys that help you score your deck, we also have a few different upgrades that can help towards scoring your deck. So the one that I'm thinking of particularly is Dark Horse, which just makes a fighter tempered for edge of the knife. Sometimes you just have to force it, right? Your opponent's like, I'm not going to attack that fighter because I don't want them to be tempered. Well, now they're tempered anyway.
Yep. I think that's especially true for that one when you're playing that with elite fighters who don't start the game tempered, where they might try to leave one of your big guys not tempered, so to deny some of your scoring, and you can just say, nope, I'm going to score it anyway.
Yeah, which is pretty nice. I think Headcase is the other like really ideal example of this as like a power card you only bring as a sort of tool towards scoring. It doesn't really do anything else on its own. In this case, Headcase is you, after a power step, a fighter with this upgrade, you can give them a charge token, I believe, is the window. Can also help with some scoring from Reckless Fury, it does help with scoring with Reckless Fury. It's very much like the point of the card. It can also help with getting charged out. Giving you some more opportunities to do certain actions that you otherwise couldn't. So it does have some other uses, but I think it is a good example of like an upgrade that on its face doesn't really do anything, but paired with everything else that's going on, gives you some extra effects. Anything else you like to consider for the upgrade side of your power deck?
Weapon upgrades.
All right, good.
These are kind of in the same vein as stat upgrades, or you could view them that way, where you are taking them to turn your fighters that maybe don't have good attacks or maybe don't have certain types of attacks and give them the option to either have a better attack or maybe now make a ranged attack.
Yeah, absolutely. I have very much started to think about weapon upgrades as just what is the difference between this weapon and the base attack on the fighter, and then I consider all the bonuses from the weapon as stat upgrades. So for instance, if you had a weapon upgrade that both did more damage than their base attack and rolled more dice than their base attack, you've essentially given them an upgrade that says, give this fighter plus dice and plus damage, right? Which if we had a base card that just said, oh, +1 dice and Grievous,
you'd take that.
You take it every single time.
That's
right?
A 4-glory upgrade right there.
Yeah, right. So yeah, weapons I think are really good for that reason. I think they do tend to be like kind of capped. I've never seen anything that lets a weapon do like more than 3 damage. I've never seen a weapon that rolls more than 3 dice. So like they're trying, I think, very much to keep them in line with like some of the best attack profiles on fighters, so that they're not just always a strict upgrade. But I think most warbands have at least one fighter that would benefit from the attack profile from a weapon.
Yeah, for the most part. Maybe some of the like super elite 3 fighter ones might not have something, but even then they can usually benefit from a ranged attack for that last activation.
Yeah, for sure. And like some of them, even with Morgox, like you have one fighter who doesn't go up to 3 damage. So like if you were to give him a weapon that gives him extra damage, that's still
something
pseudo great strength, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think weapons are a great call out. I think a lot of them are pretty good this edition for one reason or another. Some of them have some weird extra tacked on effects as well. So like we have a whip in Deadly Synergy that says that like while you're united, the attack has cleave and ensnare. So you get to pick whichever one you need for the attack, and that just boosts your accuracy quite a lot.
Mm-hmm.
It's very low damage, but like sometimes you just have to hit. And then there's one in Hunting Grounds that lets you give out move tokens when you make the attack, which is weird. I don't know if that was intended to work the way that it's written, where it just says anytime you make the attack, no matter what, you get to give them a move token if they're in friendly territory. But regardless, it's a neat extra effect to have. All right. I think that's pretty much it for the different types of cards and some considerations. We've had a good discussion. I think anything else before we just quickly talk through some decisions on what to do with restricted cards?
I guess we kind of hit a little bit on cost of upgrades. How often are you looking at ones that cost 0, or how are you evaluating those 0 cost upgrades?
Yeah. So I know Skylar likes to think about 0 cost upgrades as an extra ploy, because you can always play it. Mm-hmm. And I actually really like thinking about them that way. I think it actually raises the value in my mind a decent amount. Mm-hmm. Of course, you have to balance it versus the effect. So, Great Speed is sort of the most common one. And I think Great Speed is a pretty good upgrade. +1 move is usually helpful. Mm-hmm. The only time you wouldn't be happy to see that is if you have like a really fast warband to begin with. If your base speed is 5, do you care about going to speed 6? Probably not. But most warbands, even at speed 4, feel the boost quite a bit. Whether that's because you're allowed to like circle around and avoid like a flank scenario, or just get that really long bomb run over to a token that you normally wouldn't have been able to get to. I think it has a lot of uses, and I think the other thing that I like about the 0 cost upgrades is that they are a bit of a surprise. I don't know how often your opponent is like expecting to see them come out, because usually if they see you don't have any glory, or if you don't have any unspent glory, they will not even have to worry about what other upgrades could be coming out, because you can't spend the glory you don't have. And so those 0 costs can really come out at an inopportune moment for your opponent, and they maybe didn't plan for it.
Yep. Yeah, I think I mostly agree with that. As long as it's, or if you're thinking of it as a ploy, as long as it's a ploy you would take, then I think it's given you good value. And then as far as like a rule of thumb for how much glory in upgrades you would be taking, or what's kind of a spot you shoot for, or a number you don't want to go over as you're building a deck.
Yeah, I think what I've sort of tended to see in the decks that I build is something around like 14 is probably sort of the number as to like where you start to hit that high end. Mm-hmm. That can kind of depend, but that usually means that you're running, 3-ish, maybe 4 of those 2 glory upgrades, and that's where you really start to hit that limiter of like, can you really get away with running more of these?
Yep.
As we just discussed, those 0 cost upgrades actually can help to bring the, like, you're bringing the same number of total upgrades, but the count isn't as high for glory that you need. So can help there a little bit. I guess we haven't discussed it all, but how much do you play around with the idea that when you have a fighter go out of action and you get the total glory of the upgrades back as spendable glory, how much does that factor into your cost analysis for total upgrade cost?
I would say killing a fighter or like getting glory back for a dead fighter, I don't think about too much. Some of the ones that break, so think about like Desperate Defense, sometimes I'll think about that one a little
Yeah.
differently.
Yep.
Because I know once I've gotten the value of it, I'm going to have the glory back. I think we kind of touched on the only time that the limiting you have a more limited amount of glory is going to be in the first round. Usually by round 2 and certainly by round 3, I have more than enough glory to pay for the upgrades I want to put out.
Yeah.
So it matters, but more so early. So if I think I'm going to lose fighters early, I may be thinking about it more than some of those elite ones where I'm probably not losing a fighter until round 2 anyway.
Yeah. Is there really ever a situation you'd get into where you've grabbed all the upgrades that you think are the best cards to include, looked at the total glory it's going to cost to play them all, and said, ooh, maybe I have to make some cuts?
I think only 1 or 2 times have I done that, and it's I think only come with either Blazing or Emberstone, where there's a lot of really good 2 glory cards in there.
Yeah.
Or maybe I can cut one and be like, okay, I'll take something that's maybe not quite as good, but I'm not going to be locked out of playing upgrades in that early part of the game.
For sure. I think that's been my experience as well, is that most pairings, it's really not even a factor. Like, you're just never going to hit a glory total that's so high that you're like, oh, I'm not going to be able to play all these. Or you're not going to have a density so much that you would see them all like in your first hand and be like, I can't play these because I'm not going to have enough to get them out, because I might only have 1 or 2 spendable glory in round 1. I think that does sort of get into the idea of like the game snowballs a little bit, in that if you are getting out upgrades early, your fighters are better than your opponents. So therefore, you're going to be able to do what you want more effectively, which should then get you more glory to then play more upgrades. So the idea that you want to have upgrades you can play out early and surges to get your glory started early, I think plays into this idea of like what you're starting to take all these different parts of this deck building conversation and put it together, and it's sort of the why of all of that. And I think that is sort of the ultimate goal, is like get off to fast starts so that you can have effective fighters early so that you can do what you want more easily. And conversely, that makes it harder for your opponent.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense to me.
Yeah. Right. I think then the only other consideration for deck building really is the restricted card choice. As of right now, you get to have 1 restricted card in your deck, and almost all of the early decks have 1. Mm-hmm. The only early deck that we saw that never got a restricted card was Rack and Ruin, which I think ultimately that was actually a good choice.
Yep, I would agree with that. There's only a couple of cards in there I would even think about putting on that restricted list, but even then I don't think any of them need it.
Yeah, and it would sort of become a non-choice, right? Because even if you said like, oh, well, maybe Alone in the Dark or maybe Fireproof are like worthy of a restriction, would you really ever take those cards over a restricted card in another deck?
Not really. The only thought, if it was the Alone in the Dark, I could see maybe if you're playing Blazing Rack just to get that glory ceiling up. But yeah, otherwise, no, not really.
But yeah, it'd still be tough, right? Because then you don't get Illusory Fighter, which is like one of the best cards in the game. So yeah, I think it was a good call to not do that. Now, beyond that deck, I don't think they've done another pass of restrictions yet, so we haven't seen anything from anything printed beyond Rack and Ruin.
The only thing that got added was another card from Pillage. So all the new ones did not get any kind of touch for the most recent pass.
Yeah, Yeah. So we have a lot of decks now that probably have cards that should be restricted but aren't yet. So if you're listening to this in a few months and we've had another errata come up, this may have changed. But I think we can talk in generalities of
Mhm.
like how do you make your choice as to what is the card you want that is from that restricted list?
My first thought I like to go for is what's going to give me the highest glory ceiling. So I'm usually
Yeah.
looking at an end phase first, and then there's two end phases on there, I believe. So if you're taking that particular pairing,
Yeah.
that starts to be a very tough choice of consistency for less glory or a higher ceiling for a little less consistency. But usually end phase was my first stop.
Yeah. So we then are talking about Cataclysm and Emberstone are the
Mm-hmm.
ones that have objectives in the end phase that were restricted. Um, I think sometimes when I'm looking at it, I will also consider like what allows for me to have the smoothest scoring deck.
Mm-hmm.
And is that worth having a restricted slot? And this particularly comes up with Pillage, because they have two very easy surges, but they're both restricted now.
Yep.
And so it's like, do I care about having that really smooth surge package, or do I care more about total glory ceiling or having some powerful power card?
I think if the surges or if the other surges in pillage weren't quite so good, I'd maybe reach for one of those more often.
Yeah.
But the difference in scoring is going to be like 10% of the time, right? Or 15% of the time. And then how many of those games does it really affect?
Yeah. Yeah. It comes down to what is the other deck that you're choosing and like how
Mm-hmm.
much reliable surge exists in that other deck. And I think you can usually find one or two from any deck. And so therefore Pillage that already has like arguably 6 good surges.
5 or 6, yeah.
um, does it matter that you can't take the 2 restricted ones? Probably not. But sometimes you'll still reach for it because it just makes it that much easier. Much simpler choice when you're picking one of the decks that does not have restricted cards, obviously.
Yeah, just take whatever one of those works best for you.
Yeah. So then from the other decks that have restricted power cards, how are you making that choice?
It really comes down to which of ploys or upgrades needs more help. If I am finding that I'm only happy with 9 of my ploys, I'll take whatever the ploy is. If I'm needing an upgrade, I'll put the upgrade in. For the I think we have 2 upgrades on the list: Mobbed and Blade Catcher.
Blade Catcher. Yeah.
Really depends on what my goal with the pairing is. If I think I'm going to need more accuracy, you go for Mobbed. If you think you're going to need more defensive boost, then you'd go Blade Catcher.
Yeah. And I think specifically with Mobbed, it's an interesting choice in that like some warbands that have lots of fighters are already getting flanked and surrounded pretty reliably. And so then it's like, Mobbed is redundant at that point, which is a sort of a weird situation to have. But if you're running Edge with elites, Mobbed is very much not redundant and just feels amazing, which is, I think, why it is restricted. Because getting your elite fighter to have surrounded just for being near another fighter is pretty crazy.
Yeah.
The only ploy that's restricted is Illusory Fighter.
Mm-hmm. So like I said, if you need help on your ploy section or you just want a really powerful teleport over something else, then that's your choice.
Yeah, it's certainly a good one. There's a reason that is restricted. As we said just a moment ago, this list will probably grow, and it probably should have already happened, but it's been slow coming. There's now a lot of viable pairings that you just don't have to make a choice, which defeats the purpose, right? When the restricted list exists to limit the power of decks, but there's no actual choice that has to be made, it's not doing anything. So I think we are guaranteed going to have more restricted cards. It's just a question of when, not if. And when that time comes, there will be some more hard choices. I think there's probably more upgrade or more objectives than power cards that are probably going to make their way onto the list, because I think having to make hard choices about scoring is the thing that makes building decks that much more difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's a lot of good redundancy in power cards, and so restricting power cards sometimes isn't as impactful.
Yeah, I think there's usually an 11th ploy or an 11th upgrade I'm fine putting in, but sometimes that 7th surge or just an end phase that now I'm dropping a full glory and it's less consistent.
Yeah, for sure. But I think that is probably everything. We certainly talked about a lot. Decent amount of time here discussing. We're coming up here on 2 hours of discussion. Any final thoughts before we close this one out?
I think we hit it all pretty good. Do we want to quick run down our rules of thumb in case somebody needs to find them all in one spot?
Yeah, just a quick reminder. I think we're saying for your objectives, keep it to the 6 surges and 6 end phase unless you have a good reason to do otherwise. Mm-hmm. Try to keep your total glory around that 16 mark and go higher if you can, unless it's sacrificing consistency. Mm-hmm. Try to stick to the 20, which is 10 ploys and 10 upgrades. Take your reliable effects like extra accuracy, extra pushes, extra guard effects in ploys whenever you can, and eat your veggies on your upgrades. So take the simple things, plus wounds, plus move, plus damage, plus accuracy. You'll never go wrong if those are the things you're reaching for. In terms of the total glory for your upgrades, I think we had said like 12 to 14,
somewhere in there. Yep,
somewhere in there is like sort of try to keep it in that range for how much you're wanting to spend on the total glory. Otherwise, we had also said like try not to take more than like 3 or 4 2 glory upgrades, because that's likely going to mean you're crowding out the reliability of being able to put out your upgrades.
Yeah, and I think that kind of hits on the 12 to 14 range, is kind of that same.
Yeah,
3 to 4.
More often than not, it would overlap. The Venn diagram there is heavily overlapped. Were there anything else that we had put as like standard rules of thumb?
Just with restricted cards, generally go for reliability and sealing in your objective package first, and then round out your power deck as a secondary choice.
Yeah. All right. That's, I think, going to do it for us as a new set of sort of discussion about what to consider while building decks. If you have listened and been screaming at us saying, why didn't you talk about this thing? Jump on into our Discord or shoot us an email at whatthehexcast@gmail.com to be able to discuss those things with us. You let us know what they were, and maybe we can find some way to get that information back out to the community at large. If you'd like to check out any additional content from us or any of the other shows from the Age of Sigmar group of podcasts that we have, you can head on over to themortalrealms.com. All of those things are available there, including our blog that Zach likes to contribute to there. Anything that you're working on for the blog right now, Zach?
Yeah, I think I mentioned at the start something about reflecting on the fantasy draft we did, things we might change to make it so I can win next time. But otherwise, a couple of things I'm looking to kind of analyze what makes a good warband this edition. So that's coming, and then a little something about hunting grounds that we've been kind of teasing for a little bit, but we're trying to figure out exactly how to put that. But that as well.
Very cool. So look forward to those things. Thanks as always to our patrons. Obviously don't really expect anything of folks to be giving us any sort of money to do this. We make the show because we enjoy the game and we like talking about it. But for those who are wanting to help support the show, that's a great way to do so. We rarely have patron specific content, so definitely big shout and big thanks to those folks who are willing to donate a little bit of money to help the show out. Coming up next, likely after this episode, not super sure what it would be. Like I said, this one may be coming out of order, But stay tuned. We'll certainly have something. We've got plenty of things we could talk about, but just not sure what it's going to be just yet. All right, Zach, you're the only one on the show today, so are you ready for a Flavatex quiz?
Ready as I'll ever be.
This is actually a card that we talked about on the show, so I think it should potentially help you there. And this one, the quote is unattributed. It says, "Conquest is an insatiable beast. The further its grasp extends, the more it covets."
Oh, boy. Oh, and we talked about so many cards.
We did.
Conquests, that insatiable supremacy? Is that?
You're in the right deck, but it's not the right card.
Ooh. Conquest, Can I get the type of card?
Yeah, so another clue for you. The type of card is a ploy.
It's a ploy. Ooh. By the numbers?
That is, it's by the numbers.
All
you got
right.
it.
There we go.
Very good one. A little bit of a card draw reference there. Pretty nice card. I felt that by the numbers did a good job of summarizing what we are talking about here. As a overall discussion of all the different numbers that go into building a deck.
That's right.
Your recommended listening for this episode, this is coming from Davey, but he shouted this one for us before we started recording. This is by Tom Waits and is called "What's He Building?" And for What the Hex, I've been Phil.
And I've been Zach.
Probably, maybe. I don't know. I think you get burned once or twice by that, and you're like, never again.